Everybody's saying that Ryan Garcia fumbled the rematch, but what about Devin? I know Devin got the W at the end of the day, got the job done, but at what cost? I look at the fights and performances that Ryan and Devin had, and I say they both honestly fumbled the rematch. Ryan lost, obviously, didn't try to fight back, and to Rolly's credit, that was because of that Rolly knockdown that took place, in the second round. So I understand Ryan, being a little bit gun shy because he didn't want to get cracked again by Rolly because he felt his power. And Devin, I just don't agree or like the fact that Devin was like laughing. I get it, you're promoting the fight, I understand that, but at the end of the day, it's like you didn't increase the stock of the rematch either. If anything, you lowered the stock as well. So I think Ryan and Devin both have a lot to prove. That's why I'm saying, like, I initially watched that fight with Ryan and I was like, maybe he did do PEDs, but I don't think that's fair to say, Ryan intentionally took PEDs. Look at how he looked against Rolly. Against Rolly, Ryan obviously wasn't on PEDs because he never threw a punch and he got dropped, this and that, but like, that's not the reason why. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about styles. Fighting for Ryan, fighting Rolly is different from fighting Devin, in my opinion. If you fight a guy who's comfortable at 147, you've never fought a natural 147 pounder. You fought Devin, who was technically drained at 140, and you felt the power of a natural Rolly welterweight version of himself. Like, that's the reason why we saw what we saw. I'm not too sure I blame it on the PEDs. I don't blame Ryan's performance on the PEDs. I blame it on his inability to make 140. I think he belongs at 140 naturally. He's in his best shape at that weight class and not at 147. At 147, he's not in his best form, in my opinion. He fought Rolly, and in my evaluation, I watched that Rolly fight and I'm like, it could be about the PEDs, but for the most part, it's about the fact that Rolly hits hard, and against Devin, Ryan wasn't worried about Devin Haney's power, and that was apparent. Here, he gave Rolly, the respect because he felt that power in the second round where he got dropped. So that's the difference. I'm not too sure, I automatically say that, Ryan did PEDs now because, we know the test was positive, but, my question isn't whether or not the test was positive. The test was positive. Ryan had PEDs in his system, but did he do it intentionally is the question. And I don't think that the Rolly fight was an indication that he definitely did it, because it's styles, right? It's about styles. If he fights Devin without PEDs, there's still a good chance that Ryan Garcia cracks Devin Haney and doesn't care about Devin Haney's power, because it's not as much power as Rolly. Rolly at 147 felt comfortable, he felt strong, he felt hydrated, could take a punch, and was the bigger fighter in terms of physique, and his power was very present in there, and that's why Ryan Garcia looked the way he did, in my opinion. I think we have to see Devin and Ryan part 2. We have to see the Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia rematch to really know if Ryan Garcia intentionally took PEDs, is what I'm trying to say. And like, he didn't look like the same guy. I saw Ryan Garcia when he fought Devin, and I saw him more recently in person, and he definitely looked smaller. He looked healthier, honestly, but maybe Ryan Garcia is just one of those guys that has to have like chaos in his life. I mean, like, you look at a guy like Ryan Garcia, and I know mental health is important and everything like that, but look at back in the day when you had guys like Mike Tyson, and like, you think they tried to tame Mike Tyson. You kind of have to let Ryan be who he is. I'm glad that he's not abusing substances and alcohol, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying that, but I think he took it to an extreme, or the people around him kind of made him somebody that he's not, and then that translated into the fight. And I think Ryan Garcia just has to be himself. That's what it's all about. He has to enjoy the moment. If he wants to act a little crazy, I'm not saying go back to doing drugs and drinking all the time, I'm not saying that, but like, allow Ryan Garcia to loosen up. I think a lot of people tried to calm him down, and that affected his performance in a negative way, and hopefully he gets that fire back. And you gotta uncage Ryan Garcia. He's not a person that's meant to be caged up. He's supposed to express himself, act however he wants. Look at Mike Tyson. Like I said, you don't cage up fighters. It's not our job to say, hey, Ryan's gotta calm down, and then he calms down, and then his performance looks like tentative and he looks shy, he looks gun shy in there. You got to let Ryan Garcia be who he wants to be. You got to let Mike Tyson be who he wants to be. These guys are fighters. They're not average people. So let Ryan perform the way he wants to perform and act the way he wants to act. He's a grown man, let him do his thing. But silencing him and trying to like take a crowd away when he's fighting, not allowing him to have a proper ring walk, which is a big part of him getting energized to fight and getting excited to fight, you know, that affects his performance. And Ryan's just one of those fighters that feeds off the crowd, so he needs a crowd as well. And you know, I'm not saying, you know, Ryan shouldn't be aware when he's signing the contract. He should know that, you know, the fans aren't going to be there, blah blah blah, and you know, you're getting paid a pretty amount, so like you have to know what you're signing up for. Do you want the money or you want the performance? And I think in this moment for that event, all the fighters, they just fought for the money in Times Square. No one was actually like, let me entertain the fans, let me, you know, do something amazing out there, because they all knew that they were getting paid a crazy amount. You know, they didn't care about, you know, not having fans directly in the crowd. You know, there was a gate around the ring, so fans really couldn't see or cheer, you know, as they would in an arena. So it was just a different atmosphere that Ryan wasn't accustomed to, and I think that did play a factor in his performance. But I think he has to definitely consider moving back down to 140, because guys at 147 may be too big for Ryan Garcia, because Rolly, it has just, you know, fought at 147 for the first time. So imagine guys like Brian Norman and Boots Ennis, those guys are big. So, you know, it's even Devin, you know, Devin and Ryan should honestly consider going back to 140, because at 147, these guys are much bigger and they're grown men. You know, if not, they just have to fight each other. Just fight each other, fight Teofimo Lopez. But some of these 147 pounders, man, I think they're too big for this new batch that's attempting to go to 147, like Ryan, Teo, and Devin. They're just a little bit too small in my opinion. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate the support. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next NABS Boxing video. Peace.